Exactly, George. Thank you so much for the nice introduction and setting a ground for our discussion today. The climate change is really a financial risk, like you said. So there's a lot of opportunities and also a climate action coming out from the corporate perspective to address this issue from a financial perspective. Cool. So I'm Sidney Chen. I'm a second year Master of Drone practice student. So my final project is around assessing companies' climate-related financial disclosure. So that's my topic. And to start with, I'm listing three tech giant companies. Here today, they are Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple. They have all made quite ambitious climate goals in recent years. Take Microsoft as example. By 2030, Microsoft will achieve carbon negative, which means their greenhouse gas emission is even smaller than the amount of carbon that they capture and sequester. Even more, by 2050, Microsoft will remove all the all the carbon that the company has emitted, either directly or by electric consumption, since it was founded in 1975, which is one of its kind of commitment in the industry. Sounds pretty promising, right? However, one founder of Science-Based Target Initiative once said, if you look at the company's website and you find their sustainability report and they all look great, but when you look at what is really behind it, you will see there's a lot of substance behind those commitment, or those commitment are really not comprehensive enough. So my message here is trying to pick up Microsoft and to even give the credit to Microsoft as a leader in sustainability. They have been making huge progress and give enormous amount of pressure to other industry peers like Amazon and Apple in this case. But my message here is if you are not a sustainability professional, it is really hard for you to tell what is the quality of their commitment and what is the quality of their climate-related disclosure, how it is evaluated against its peer, and even to some degree whether it is just purely greenwashing or impact washing in this case. Although climate commitment as part of companies' climate-related disclosure are abundant in assumption and nuance. If you look at the statement from the Microsoft, we are actually not saying they are addressing the historical emission from their supplier, or it is also not clear whether the end of life was accounted in the equation of their ambitious climate commitment goal. Therefore, it leaves us a question: how can we assess companies' climate-related disclosure? So this is the time that I introduce the framework of T70, and the T70 is a framework that helps companies to understand how climate change will impacting their risk and also management, their strategy, their governance, and also and their target and metrics. However, the current challenge of comparing different companies' climate-related disclosure is a lack of comparability. Like, for example, when we're looking at one company's T70 report, you can see how they are addressing different indicators listed here. As you can see, the 11 indicator and the 4 different pillars. But when you are comparing different companies T70 standalone report from one company to another companies, you will actually notice a huge variability and difference from one companies to another companies, even though they're claiming to stick into the T70 framework as a guidelines and also answering the 11 recommendation listed here. So the huge variability leads to a question of how can we really assess companies' quality of their climate-related disclosure. And given that there are so much nuance, so much complexity into this, I choose to dive into some of the existing framework to find out if there's any convergence or standardized procedure for companies to undertake to conduct to answer those 11 questions. And you can see in this picture, I conducted a research and also several like interviews to compare across different ESG rating agency. And to answer the question that I raised earlier in the last slide, whether there's a standardized procedure or indicator for each companies to comply with, the answer to that is no. There's no convergence across different rating agency. Different rating agency has its own strategic focus when it comes to climate change. Some focus more on the greenhouse gas emission, some focus more on the financial impact of climate change on the business operation. So different rating agency has different opinions and strategic choices and focus when it comes to climate change. Then how would I go around this issue of standardization and also the complexity when companies implement the T70 recommendation? I conducted really several like research and also several subject matter experts in the space of T70. Here's the final tools that I come up with. So this is a tool that can help companies to, first of all, understanding the quality of their disclosure. Second of all, it can also help companies to flag and also to do a gap analysis to see which indicator has been really missing and needs improving. So for example, like you look at this slide right now, we are looking at the governance pillar out of the 4 pillars of governance, risk management, strategy, and the metrics and target. So in this pillar, there are 2 specific recommendations under T70. One is board oversight. The second is management role. As I mentioned earlier, it is really up to the company itself to determine how they address, how they are really responding to the board oversight, and also how they are really describing the management role. So there's a lot of complexity and different approaches from different companies. So I develop a T70 metrics in this to standardize this procedure to help compare across different companies. So those T70 metrics is developed by either like research, best practices, or the experts interview. So this is not only the coolest part of this tool, even more fancy or terrific part is we can actually give a weight or score to each indicator. For example, for this one, I give a 25% of their score under this indicator. And after conducting the 4 indicator, I can actually have an overall score for this recommendation. And doing this kind of analysis for 11 times, I could also generate the whole overall T70 score for this company's disclosure. So this is the deliverable that I see is going to be really meaningful for companies to understand how far they have been achieving in terms of the climate-related disclosure. So lastly, this is at the closing notes, I want to share 2 takeaways for not only to share with everyone, but more importantly is to remind myself why like working in the space in the future and looking back at this 5-minute step talk, I want to remind myself to don't forget about the bigger picture of the climate change, especially in the corporate climate action space. As a development practice student, we really need I really need to remember the impact of climate change is really, at the end of the day, is impacting the human and also human's livelihood. Those vulnerable community living in the coastal area or the most vulnerable like development community, they are in the front line of the climate change, and their livelihood, their well-being is really greatly affected by the intensifying climate change in the future. And this is the first note I want to share with myself. The second is T70 or corporate climate action is just one piece of the solution. It really needs a systematic change to really tackle and address climate change. So there's really much work to be done from making carbon pricing and trading system to making a really climate friendly policy framework to make climate action from the corporate mandatory. there's a lot of option and a lot of toolbox that we need to use all in together to address the climate change issue. However, on the silver lining is things are going to the right direction, and but there's still much work needs to be done. That's my presentation here today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sidney. Started us off very well. So I invite those listening in. I see we have some current students, some alumni, faculty, and others. Please feel free to comment or make suggestions or ask questions. But let me ask one. Sidney, so what is going to drive this system? Is it investors? Is it consumers? Is it egos of corporate executives? What is going to really make this become real?
Yeah, George, that's a really great question, and also it is answering this question is really help us to understand the motivation of those companies. Why are they doing this in the first place? And everything you have mentioned I think is applied in this case. But I would highlight two main reasons. The first motivation for companies to do the climate action is actually from the investor perspective. The Larry Fink letter to the CEO, and also a lot of ESG investor and also responsible investor are really pushing forward of the climate agenda in the in the private sector. That's the first one. The second one, I would say the regulation, especially for the Biden new administration, the Security Exchange Commission, they are about to publish their ESG and also climate-related disclosure, like the guidance for the companies to follow in this coming years or months. So the climate change in this sense has been translated into compliance and also regulatory risk if you are not really addressing climate change in that perspective. But like you said, there are also customer expectation, especially for like the Patagonia, like they have a really, really responsible customer base. A lot of pressure is coming out from the customer perspective. And obviously some board or executive, they actually have a ego and ambitions to become a sustainability leader in their industry. They want to be on top of everything. Sustainability is not an exception to that. So it's really important to understand like how different companies are coming, where they are coming, and what are their motivations behind it. So yeah, that's my shorter answer to that.
Yeah, well, there's a great. You'll get the comments later, Professor Yago, giving some great things to look at, particularly the whole question of the standardization, which really brings this all together. But Siobhan is asking a little bit, so where do you see the gaps in the four pillars as you look?
Right, that's a absolutely great question. So, and also my answer to that really changed from last summer. If you were asking me the same question, I would probably say it is a scenario analysis part, like scenario analysis, which falls under the risk management pillar, which is to put the scenario analysis in a really easy way is to understand in a future climate scenario how companies will be affected from the climate change impact. What are some of the risks and opportunity, say in RCP 8.5, in RCP 4.0, 4.5 scenario? So it's really understanding the impact of climate change on business operation and also the financial bottom line. But if I were asking the question at this point, I would actually say there's also a lot of work needs to be done in the governance part and also in the strategy part, because understanding the climate change impact is really a purely technical expertise or technical issue. It's really easy to understand. It's not that easy, but it's actually slightly easier to do. But for companies to develop a climate aware governance structure, or have a board who have climate expertise, or even have those like member on the board who have like experience related to climate change, or get the buy-in from the corporate. It is really hard. It is really hard for those like conservative company. Not every company is like Patagonia. Not every company is like Apple or Microsoft in their climate action. There are still a fairly great amount of companies are in a climate denial space or climate skepticism, are waiting to action right now. So this is really hard for those companies to have a climate aware strategy or governance structure in place. So I would say that the answer to that really changed from time to time for me.
All right. Another great question here. I mean, and this comes up quite often. The difference between kind of a more technical understanding of a company's climate and how they interact with the community. I mean, is there a trade-off between community and climate? And is it the climate in terms of just overall, mitigation of climate change? Or what about the climate of the local community that's being affected by the company's operations? How does all that fit
Exactly.
together?
This is an absolutely excellent question. I also really appreciate we're calling this out in the climate discussion right now, especially in the corporate space. There's a really huge lack of environmental justice piece, as we understand. So the logic of the T70 is the climate change will impact your logistic, will impact your coastal asset. So you should probably move inland or to move in less vulnerable, less climate severe area. However, those areas are most vulnerable. Those community based in this area are most vulnerable. And if we are divesting from those area, it is actually taking out the job, taking out the opportunities for the local community to prosper. So we in the firm that we'll be working with, we already recognizing the problem of the environmental justice piece of the current narrative of the T70. So I would say because of the SEC guidance around climate disclosure, we really wish there will be an environmental justice piece embedded in it, not only like just mitigating the risk or creating adaptation or resiliency towards it, but really focusing on how can we create a win-win situation both for the company to be climate pro and also create an opportunity for the local communities to protect it from the future climate scenario. So this is an absolutely excellent question, and there's much work needs to be done, and also the connection needs to be made, and the business case needs to be developed in this sense. Yeah.
All right, Sidney. Well, listen, thank you very much. Again, this is one of those topics we could talk for the next hour about, at least if not more, but we have to move on.